The cabin sat in the Colorado wilderness like a man's last prayer, clinging to the side of a mountain that had forgotten God's name. For 6 long winters, Marcus Holloway had lived there, and for 6 long winters, he'd been dying. He wasn't hiding from the cold, or the wolves, or the loneliness. He was hiding from a memory of smoke and screams and the smell of whiskey on his breath when he should have been home. The mine explosion, the one that took his Ayana, the one that took little Annie. He was miles away, cursing a world that had given him everything, just to prove he was man enough to throw it all away. He thought he'd paid his penance. He thought the silence and the snow were his final judgment. He was wrong. Judgment was just getting started. It came on a Tuesday, in the middle of a blizzard that was trying to bury the world. He saw them through the swirling snow, 2 figures stumbling toward his cabin like ghosts looking for a place to rest. An old Apache woman, her face a road map of hard years, and a younger woman holding her up. The old woman collapsed on his doorstep, her breath a ragged whisper. The younger one knelt beside her, and that's when she looked up. Her dark eyes met his through the storm, and Marcus felt a jolt. Something he hadn't felt in 6 years. It wasn't love. It wasn't lust. It was fear. Because beauty like that wasn't a gift. It was a weapon. It was the kind of beauty that started wars, that made good men forget their promises. He knew. He'd been one of them. "Please," the old woman gasped, her weathered hand clutching his coat like a lifeline. "My daughter, Luna." Marcus looked at the girl. Luna. She didn't look scared. She looked defiant, like she was challenging the storm, challenging him, challenging God himself to do his worst. It was the same look his Ayana had given him that last morning, the look that said she knew exactly what kind of trouble a man like him could bring. He should have shut the door. He should have left them to the mountain. A man who's already buried his family has no business saving anyone else's. But he didn't. The old woman coughed, and a spray of blood blossomed on the pure white snow. "2 men," she whispered, her eyes wide with a terrifying urgency. "Already dead. Fighting for her." She pointed a trembling finger at Luna. "The tribe, they cast us out. Said she was a curse." A curse! That was the word, wasn't it? The same word he'd used for himself every day for 2,990 days. He felt the weight of a choice settle on his shoulders, a feeling he'd avoided like the plague. For 6 years he'd chosen nothing. He ate when he was hungry, slept when he was tired, and drank when the memories got too loud. Now here were 2 women dying in his doorway, and they weren't just asking for shelter. They were offering him the one thing he'd sworn he'd never touch again, a reason to fight. What do you think? What would you have done? Would you have turned them away? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're ready for this story to get truly insane, hit that like button, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than any mine shaft Marcus ever worked. He carried the old woman inside. She weighed less than his rifle. He named her Ayana in his head, a ghost he couldn't shake. Luna followed, silent as a shadow, her eyes scanning every corner of the small cabin. She moved with a strange, watchful grace, like an animal that knows it's being hunted. "There's soup," Marcus grunted, nodding toward the pot on the fire. "Blankets." He didn't offer more. He couldn't. Words were a currency he'd run out of long ago. Luna didn't thank him. She simply knelt by her mother, her hands moving with a practiced efficiency that was unnerving. She spooned broth into the old woman's mouth, wiped her brow, and whispered to her in a language that sounded ancient and full of secrets. When she reached for a log to add to the fire, her worn dress pulled tight across her back. Even through the faded cotton, Marcus could see the powerful lines of a body that was built for survival. He turned away, his knuckles white as he gripped his axe handle. He busied himself with firewood that was already perfectly stacked. "You're not what I expected," a voice said from behind him. Luna. Her English was clean, crisp. Boarding school, maybe. But underneath it was something else, something wilder. "What did you expect?" he asked, not turning around. "A man alone this long in the mountains?" She said. "They usually stare, or they get ideas." Marcus split a log with a single, violent swing. The wood cracked like a gunshot in the small cabin. "I've had my fill of staring at things I can't have." He could feel her eyes on his back, analytical and sharp. This wasn't some helpless girl lost in the woods. This was something else entirely. And the old woman wasn't just a sick mother. She was a guardian, a gatekeeper, and he had a terrible feeling he was about to find out what she was guarding. The mother's fever broke on the third day. Marcus had been checking his trap lines, deliberately staying away, giving them space. He didn't want to get involved. He didn't want to know their story. But when he returned, the old woman was sitting up, her eyes clear and sharp as flint. Luna was nowhere to be seen. "She's bathing," the old woman said, as if reading his mind. "In the stream." Marcus grunted, moving to the fireplace. He had no intention of looking. He'd spent 6 years learning how to not look, how to not want, how to not feel. "You think I am a fool, Marcus Holloway?" The old woman's voice was surprisingly strong. "You think I am trading my daughter like she is a horse or a blanket?" Marcus finally turned to face her. "I think you're a mother trying to keep her child alive." The old woman let out a dry, rasping laugh. "Alive? Look at her." She gestured toward the window. Against his better judgment, Marcus glanced. Through the gaps in the trees, he could see the glint of water, the flash of bronze skin. Luna stood waist-deep in the freezing stream, her back to the cabin. Water cascaded over her shoulders, her long black hair clinging to her body like a second skin. It was a sight that could make a saint curse his vows. "You see beauty," the old woman said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I see a curse that has left a trail of bodies from our village to this desolate place." Marcus turned away from the window, his heart pounding a guilty rhythm. "She told me. 2 men. 2?" The old woman spat the word. "2 is what she knows. The first was a boy named Naichi. He killed his own brother for the right to court her. The tribal council forgave it as a crime of passion. The second was a warrior, Daniel. He tried to steal her during a peace ceremony with the Ute. 12 men died before the elders could restore order. Our own people." She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the cabin. "They said she was disrupting the balance. They said the spirits were angry. They gave us 2 days to leave, or they would purify the village themselves." Purify. Marcus knew what that word meant. "She's not evil," the old woman said, her eyes boring into his. "But she carries something that makes men evil. It makes them forget their wives, their honor, their gods. She needs a man who is already broken, a man who has nothing left to lose." Marcus felt a cold dread creep up his spine. "And you think that's me?" The old woman gave him a sad, knowing smile. "You are already lost, son. The only question is whether you're lost enough to survive her." That night something shifted. The air in the cabin grew thick, charged with unspoken things. Luna prepared a meal of venison and wild herbs she'd found. She moved around the small space as if she'd lived there her whole life, her hips swaying with a natural rhythm that was both innocent and deeply provocative. She served him his plate, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. A spark of heat shot up his arm, a jolt of life in a body that had felt dead for years. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. They ate in silence. The only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. It was a comfortable silence, but it was also a dangerous one. It was the kind of silence that lets you hear things you've been trying to ignore. "Tell me about them," Luna said suddenly, her voice soft but clear. His fork clattered against the tin plate. He froze. "Who?" "Your wife. Your child." She wasn't looking at him. She was staring into the fire, but he knew she saw everything. "You have their graves on the hill. I saw them." The walls of the cabin seemed to close in on him. He hadn't spoken their names aloud in 6 years. Ayana, Annie. They were ghosts, sacred and silent. "There's nothing to tell," he said, his voice rough. "There's always something to tell," she replied, finally turning her dark eyes to him. "You look at that hill the way I look over my shoulder, like you're expecting something to come crawling out of the past to claim you." He wanted to scream at her. He wanted to throw her out into the storm. Who was this girl to walk into his sanctuary of grief and start digging at the foundations? But then he looked at her, really looked at her, and he didn't see a temptress or a curse. He saw a girl who was just as haunted as he was, A girl who knew what it was like to be blamed for something that wasn't her fault. Her name was Ayana, he heard himself say, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. She was kind, the kind of person who makes you want to be better than you are. And Annie had her mother's laugh. She would have been 8 this year. The confession left him feeling hollowed out, raw. Luna didn't offer sympathy. She didn't say she was sorry for his loss. She just nodded, her eyes filled with a deep, unsettling understanding. She reached across the small table, her hand covering his. Her skin was warm, calloused from work, but impossibly soft. I know what it's like to feel responsible for death, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The difference is, you weren't even there. Her words weren't meant to absolve him. They were a statement of fact. And somehow that cut deeper than any accusation ever could. He was punishing himself for a choice he never even got to make. He pulled his hand away, the warmth of her touch lingering on his skin. Why are you here, Luna? What do you really want? She leaned forward, the firelight dancing in her eyes, making them look like pools of liquid night. My mother is dying, she said, each word precise and heavy. And when she does, you will have a choice to make. You can send me away to whatever fate awaits me, or you can let me stay. She paused, her gaze unwavering. I'm not asking for your protection, Marcus Holloway. I'm telling you what you're getting into. I'm telling you that death follows me, and if you let me stay, it will find its way to your door. Outside, the wind howled like a hungry wolf. Inside, the fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. And in the middle of it all, 2 broken people sat in a silence that was about to shatter everything. Because what Marcus didn't know was that death wasn't just following her. It was already on its way, and it wasn't coming for Luna. It was coming for him. The old woman died on a Tuesday morning, as quiet as the melting snow. Luna didn't weep. She sat beside the bed, her hands methodically braiding her mother's thin, gray hair, her face a mask of stone. She continued this ritual for hours until the sun began to dip below the peaks and the cabin filled with the long shadows of evening. Marcus finally placed a hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily. She didn't flinch, but he felt a tremor run through her. We'll bury her on the hill, he said, his voice softer than he intended. Next to my family. Luna finally looked up, her eyes empty. You don't have to do that. Yes, he said, a strange certainty settling in his gut. I do. They dug the grave together, under the cold light of a full moon. The frozen ground was unforgiving, and each strike of the pickaxe sent a shockwave up his arms. They worked in silence, a grim rhythm of steel against earth. As they worked, Luna shed her heavy coat, and the thin fabric of her blouse grew damp with sweat, clinging to the curves of her body. Marcus forced himself to focus on the task, on the ache in his muscles, on anything but the woman working beside him. When the last stone was placed over the fresh mound of earth, Luna asked the question that had been hanging between them for days. What happens now? Marcus wiped the dirt from his hands with a handful of snow, the cold biting at his skin. He had rehearsed the answer in his head, the safe answer, the right answer. You can head to Denver, find work, marry a good man. But the words caught in his throat. He looked at the 3 graves on the hill, 2 old, 1 new. He looked at the woman standing before him, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes searching his for something he wasn't sure he had to give. Righteousness felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. Is that what you want? She pressed, taking a small step closer. For me to leave. He could feel the warmth of her breath in the frigid air. He could smell the scent of pine and wood smoke in her hair. 6 years of loneliness, 6 years of self-imposed exile, 6 years of a cold, empty bed. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. No, he said, the word a rough growl torn from his soul. No, it's not what I want. Luna's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. A flicker of relief, or was it triumph? Then what do you want, Marcus Holloway? He should have lied. He should have talked about companionship, about practical arrangements, about 2 lonely people sharing a roof to survive the winter. But he was tired of lying, most of all to himself. He reached out, his calloused fingers hesitating for a moment before touching her cheek. Her skin was like silk. He traced the line of her jaw, his thumb coming to rest on her bottom lip. "I want to stop being afraid of wanting things," he whispered. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. A sigh escaped her lips, a small cloud of vapor in the moonlight. "Then stop being afraid." The kiss was not gentle, it was a collision. It was the desperate, hungry meeting of two people who had been starved for too long. Her lips were soft but demanding, and when her tongue met his, a fire ignited in his veins, burning away 6 years of carefully constructed control. He pulled her against him, his hands tangling in her hair, her body molding to his as if they were two halves of a whole. This was madness. This was a mistake. This was the most alive he had felt since the day the mine collapsed. But just as he was losing himself completely, Luna pulled back slightly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked not at his face, but at his chest. "Before we go inside," she whispered, her voice trembling, with an intensity that had nothing to do with passion. "There is something you need to see, something my mother made me promise to show you, if she passed." Marcus frowned, confused by the sudden shift. "Show me what?" Luna reached into the collar of her dress and pulled out a thin leather cord. Hanging from it was not a pendant or a stone, but a small folded piece of oilcloth, yellowed with age. With trembling fingers, she untied it and carefully unfolded it. It was a drawing, a wanted poster. The likeness was crude, charcoal on parchment, but the face was unmistakable. The square jaw, the hard eyes, the scar that ran from his temple to his chin. It was him. Marcus stared at the drawing, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Below the sketch, the words were stark and clear. Marcus Holloway, wanted for questioning, murder and sabotage. Black Creek mine disaster. The world tilted on its axis. The cold of the night seeped into his bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. Luna's eyes were wide with fear, not of him, but for him. "My mother. She was a healer. She was called to the mining camp a week before the explosion. She heard things. Whispers in the saloons, men talking about faulty timbers, about safety reports being ignored, about the new foreman who was pushing them too hard." She took a shaky breath. The company needed a scapegoat. The man in charge of the shift that day, the man who was conveniently absent, drowning his sorrows in a bottle. They told everyone you ran, that you caused the cave-in to cover your tracks after a dispute. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. 6 years. 6 years he had carried the guilt, the shame. He had punished himself, believing he had failed them, that his absence was a sin of omission. He never once imagined that it had been a setup, that he hadn't just lost his family to an accident, they had been murdered, and he had been framed for it. "Who?" he growled, his hands clenching into fists. "Who was the man in charge?" Luna's gaze flickered with something he couldn't decipher. It looked like pity. "She didn't know his name," Luna whispered, her hand tightening on the wanted poster. "But she saw him, a tall man with cold eyes and a silver watch chain. He was the one giving the orders, the one who met with the company men from Denver." She looked up at him, her beautiful face a portrait of grim resolution. "He left the territory right after the explosion, but 2 months ago he came back. My mother saw him in a trading post near our village. He was asking questions. Not about the mine. He was asking about a girl. A girl whose beauty was said to be a curse." The pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a cell door slamming shut. The men who died fighting over her, the tribe casting her out. It wasn't a curse, it was a fabrication, a story created to isolate her, to make her an outcast, to make her easy to find. This man, the one who had destroyed Marcus's life, was now hunting her. "Why?" Marcus demanded. "Why is he after you?" Luna finally met his gaze, and the fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient sorrow. "Because my mother was not Apache. She was the last of a Spanish bloodline that settled in these mountains centuries ago. And that man, he doesn't want my hand in marriage. She paused, letting the final devastating truth land. He wants the map tattooed on my back. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. A map, not a curse, a map. The stories, the deaths, the exile. It was all a lie, a smokescreen for something far more tangible and dangerous. Greed. A map to what? He asked, his voice strained. El Nido del Oro, Luna whispered, the Spanish words sounding like a prayer and a curse. The nest of gold, a lost Spanish mine, a legend in my family for generations. The location is not on paper. It is a part of me, passed from mother to daughter, etched onto our skin at birth so it could never be stolen. He stared at her, at the woman who was both a treasure and a treasure map. The men who had died weren't suitors killed in petty squabbles. They were guardians, members of her tribe who knew the truth and had died trying to protect her from the outside world. The tribal council hadn't cast her out because she was a curse. They had cast her out to save the rest of the tribe, sacrificing her to the wolves so the pack could survive. Everything he thought he knew about her was a carefully constructed lie designed to keep her alive. And now that lie had led her straight to him. The man, Marcus said, his mind racing, piecing together the horrifying tapestry. The one from the mine, the one hunting you. He knows about the map. He knows the legend, Luna corrected. He doesn't know for certain it's real. That's why he was asking questions, trying to find me. He believes I am the key. The wind whipped around them, tearing at their clothes, but Marcus didn't feel it. A rage, cold and pure, was building inside him. For 6 years he had been a ghost, haunted by a tragedy he blamed himself for. Now he knew the truth. It wasn't a tragedy, it was an atrocity. And the man responsible was not only free, but was now threatening the first person who had made Marcus feel anything other than grief. "We have to go," he said, his voice hard as iron. "We need to disappear." Luna shook her head, a defiant fire burning in her eyes. "There is nowhere to go. My mother told me about men like him. He has eyes everywhere. Runners, trackers. He is Silas Vance." The name meant nothing to Marcus. "He is the man buying up all the land for the new railroad," she explained. "He bleeds the mountains for their timber and their coal, and he bleeds the men who work for him. He doesn't stop until he owns everything. Black Creek Mine was just one piece of his empire. He wanted the land, but the safety protocols were costing him money. It was cheaper to have an accident and buy the claim for pennies on the dollar, and frame a grieving foreman to take the fall. Suddenly, the kiss they had shared felt like a lifetime ago. The burgeoning desire was gone, replaced by a grim, shared purpose. This was no longer about two lonely souls finding solace. This was about survival. This was about revenge. "Your turn," she said softly, her meaning clear. The time for secrets was over. He led her back inside the cabin. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in a dim, red glow. The space that had felt charged with passion now felt like a war room. Luna turned her back to him and began to unbutton her blouse. She didn't do it seductively, as she might have done before. This was a clinical, necessary act. The blouse slipped from her shoulders, followed by the thin cotton chemise. In the faint light, Marcus saw it. It was not a map in the traditional sense. There were no lines, no names, no compass rose. Instead, her entire back, from her shoulders to the small of her waist, was covered in a breathtakingly intricate tapestry of lines and symbols. It looked like a series of constellations, swirling patterns that followed the elegant curves of her spine. It was beautiful, ancient, and deadly. He could see the shapes of mountains, the curve of a river, the symbol of a twin-peaked summit. It was a riddle written in ink on human skin. "Only the women of my line can read it," she whispered, not turning around. "It corresponds to the stars at the winter solstice. Without the knowledge, it's just a pretty pattern." He reached out, his fingers tracing one of the swirling lines on her warm skin. It was a strange and terrible intimacy. He was touching a secret that men had killed for. "He will not stop," she said, her voice barely audible. "He will hunt me until he has this, and he will kill anyone who stands in his way." She finally turned to face him, her eyes dark with a terrible certainty. Her bare breasts rose and fell with each shallow breath. In that moment, she was not a temptress or a victim. She was a warrior. "So I will ask you again, Marcus Holloway," she said, her gaze locking with his. "What do you want? You can take your horse and ride. Disappear. No one would blame you. He wants me, not you." But she was wrong. Silas Vance had already taken everything from Marcus once. He had taken his wife, his child, his name, and his honor. Now he was coming for the one thing Marcus had left to lose, a second chance. He looked at the woman standing before him, vulnerable and fierce. He looked at the ghosts of his past and the monster that was coming for their future. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach. But for the first time in 6 years, it was overshadowed by something else. Rage. "What do I want?" he said, his voice a low growl. "I want him to come. I want him to find us." He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. "Let him come. I've been waiting for him for 6 years. I just didn't know his name." The next few days passed in a tense, surreal calm. The storm before the storm. They were no longer just a man and a woman in a cabin. They were soldiers preparing for a siege. The intimacy between them changed. It was no longer about desire, but about a shared, desperate fight for survival. Every glance, every touch was freighted with the knowledge of what was coming. Marcus became the man he used to be. The foreman, the planner. He spent his days reinforcing the cabin, boarding up the smaller window, checking his meager supply of ammunition. He had a Winchester, a Colt revolver, and about 50 rounds between them. Not nearly enough. He taught Luna how to load and fire the revolver, her hands surprisingly steady, her aim true. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked, watching her put 3 rounds into the center of a knot on a pine tree from 30 yards. "My father," she said, not elaborating. The secrets between them had been replaced by a wall of shared trauma, but there were still bricks missing. Questions he didn't ask. At night they would sit by the fire, the wanted poster lying on the table between them like a death sentence. He would study the map on her back, trying to memorize the patterns, the swirls, the landmarks. "The twin sisters," he'd murmur, tracing a particular symbol. "And this must be the Snake River." "You see with a surveyor's eye," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "I see with a miner's eye," he corrected. "I know these mountains. I know how they hide their secrets." They slept in shifts, one always awake, rifle in hand, listening to the sounds of the night. In those quiet, dark hours, a new kind of bond formed. They talked. She told him about her childhood, about the weight of her secret, the loneliness of being a living legend that no one could ever know. He, in turn, told her more about Ayana and Annie. He spoke their names, and for the first time, it didn't feel like tearing open a wound. It felt like an introduction. He was showing Luna the people he was fighting for, the ghosts who stood beside him. One night as she took the watch, she found him staring at the graves on the hill through the cabin's main window. "You're afraid of failing them again," she said, coming to stand beside him. "I'm afraid of you ending up on that hill with them," he admitted, his voice raw. She placed her hand on his arm, her touch sending a current of warmth through him. "We will not fail, Marcus. That man Vance, he is driven by greed. We are driven by something stronger." He looked at her, at the fierce determination in her eyes. "What's that?" "Vengeance," she said without hesitation. "And hope." The first sign of trouble came not as a frontal assault, but as a subtle shift in the wilderness. The birds went quiet. His trap lines, usually full, were empty for 2 days straight. The forest was holding its breath. On the third morning, Marcus saw him, a lone rider, sitting on a ridge a mile away, watching the cabin through a spyglass. He wasn't trying to be subtle. This was a message. We are here. We are watching. "He's testing us," Marcus said, pulling Luna away from the window, "trying to see if we'll run." "Will we?" she asked. "Running is what he wants," Marcus said, his jaw tight. "It means we're scared. It means we're prey. We're not running." The rider stayed on the ridge all day, a silent, ominous statue. When night fell, he was gone. But they both knew he wasn't alone. The pack was circling. The next day, the psychological warfare began. They woke to find a dead rabbit on their doorstep, its throat slit. The day after, it was a fox, hanging from a tree branch by its hind legs. Vance wasn't just coming for them, he was toying with them, trying to break their nerve. "He wants us to be afraid," Luna said, her face pale but her voice steady as she cut down the fox. "He thinks fear will make us sloppy." "Is it working?" Marcus asked. She met his gaze, and a slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. "It's making me angry." That night, Marcus decided they had to change the game. Waiting to be attacked in the cabin was a death sentence. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Their only advantage was the terrain. He knew these woods better than anyone. "Tonight," he said, spreading a crude map he'd drawn on the table, "we stop being the prey." His plan was simple and bordering on suicidal. He was going to hunt the hunters. He left just after midnight, melting into the moonless dark like a phantom. He moved with a silence born of years spent tracking game, his feet making no sound on the pine needles. He circled wide around the cabin, approaching the ridge where the spotter had been from behind. He found their camp less than a mile from the ridge. 4 men huddled around a low fire, their rifles leaning against a log. They were confident, careless. They believed they were the predators. Marcus watched them from the shadows for nearly an hour, studying their movements, their positions, the rhythm of their breathing. There were 4 of them. Vance wasn't with them. These were his hounds, sent to flush the quarry. He could have picked them off from a distance with the Winchester. It would have been the smart play. But this wasn't about being smart. This was about sending a message back to Silas Vance. He took out the first man with a knife, a silent, brutal takedown as the man stepped away from the fire to relieve himself. One moment he was standing, the next he was gone, dragged into the darkness without a sound. He left the body where it fell and circled the camp again. He waited. It took 10 minutes for the others to notice their friend was missing. One of them called out his name, first casually, then with a rising note of panic. 2 of them stood up, rifles ready, peering into the oppressive darkness beyond the firelight. That's when Marcus opened fire. He didn't shoot to kill. Not yet. He fired 2 rounds from the Colt, the shots echoing like thunder in the silent woods. The first shot splintered the log next to one man's head, sending splinters flying into his face. The second shot hit the coffee pot on the fire, sending a scalding geyser into the air. The men panicked. They fired blindly into the darkness, their muzzle flashes illuminating their terrified faces. Marcus was already gone, melting back into the trees, circling to a new position. He repeated the tactic 3 more times from 3 different locations, firing single shots that whizzed past their ears, that kicked up dirt at their feet. He was a ghost in the trees, an unseen, terrifying presence. He made them waste their ammunition. He made them fear the dark. He turned the hunters into the hunted. After 20 minutes of this torment, they broke. They grabbed what they could and fled, crashing through the underbrush like spooked cattle. Marcus didn't pursue them. He walked calmly into their abandoned campsite. He kicked their fire apart, scattering the embers. He took their spare ammunition and a canteen of whiskey. Then, using the dead man's knife, he carved a message into the bark of the largest pine tree facing the trail. 3 words. Send Vance himself. He returned to the cabin just before dawn. Luna was at the window, revolver in hand, her face etched with worry. The relief that washed over her when she saw him was so profound, it was almost painful to watch. He didn't say a word. He just walked in, placed the extra ammunition on the table, and took a long swallow from the stolen canteen. "Did you?" she started to ask. "One less," he said, his voice flat. "The other 3 ran." He looked at her, and she saw the man he had been before the mine, before the grief. A man who was dangerous, a man who was in control. "I sent them back with a message," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "The game has changed. Now we wait for the king to leave his castle." The woods fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a held breath, of a world waiting for the inevitable collision. They knew Vance would come. Marcus had wounded his pride, had challenged him directly. A man like Silas Vance couldn't let that stand. The wait was the hardest part. Every creak of the cabin, every snap of a twig outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through their veins. They didn't know if he would come with an army or if he would come alone. 2 days later, as the sun was setting, casting long, bloody fingers of light across the snow, a single rider appeared on the trail leading to the cabin. He wasn't on the distant ridge this time. He was coming directly for them, moving at a slow, deliberate walk, as if he were out for a Sunday stroll. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a black wool coat, despite the rugged terrain. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the glint of a silver watch chain across his vest. It was him, Silas Vance, and he was coming alone. "Stay inside," Marcus ordered Luna, grabbing his Winchester. "Bar the door. Do not open it for any reason. If he gets past me, you run. You head for the high pass, and you don't look back. Do you understand?" Luna grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "No, I'm not leaving you." "This isn't a choice," he snarled, his fear for her making him harsh. "This is my fight. It always has been. I'm just finishing it. Now promise me." She hesitated, her lip trembling. Then she nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I promise." Marcus stepped outside, closing the cabin door behind him. He stood on the porch, the Winchester held loosely at his side, and waited. Vance reined in his horse about 50 feet from the cabin. He dismounted with a fluid grace, his movements calm and unhurried. He had the placid, confident air of a man who had never lost a fight in his life. His face was handsome in a severe, predatory way, with cold blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He looked at Marcus, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. "Marcus Holloway," Vance said, his voice smooth and cultured, utterly out of place in the wilderness. "A ghost. I heard you died of grief in cheap whiskey years ago. Imagine my surprise when my men came running back to me with stories of a demon in the woods." "Your men were careless," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. "Indeed," Vance agreed, taking a step forward. "A mistake I will not make. I've come for what is mine, Holloway. The girl. Give her to me, and I will let you return to your miserable existence. I might even throw in a few gold coins for your trouble. A finder's fee, shall we say?" Marcus laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "The last time you and I did business, you left my wife and daughter buried under 1,000 tons of rock." Vance's smile didn't falter. "Business is often messy. The Black Creek claim was a necessary acquisition. Your family was an unfortunate, but acceptable, cost of progress. As were you, had you not conveniently made yourself scarce." There was no remorse in his voice, no guilt, just the cold, detached logic of a predator. In that moment, Marcus knew that killing this man wouldn't be an act of vengeance. It would be an act of sanitation. "I'm not giving you the girl," Marcus said, raising the Winchester so it was pointed squarely at Vance's chest. Vance chuckled, unconcerned. He slowly opened his coat. He wasn't wearing a gun belt. Instead, tucked into his waistband was a single ornate derringer with an ivory handle. It was a gentleman's gun, an afterthought. "You misunderstand the situation, my dear boy," Vance said conversationally. "This is not a negotiation. I am not here to persuade you." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound book. He opened it and held it up. "Do you know what this is, Holloway?" Marcus squinted. He couldn't make out the details from this distance. "This," Vance said, his voice dripping with triumphant poison, "is the journal of your late wife, Ayanna." The world stopped. The air turned to ice in Marcus's lungs. The Winchester suddenly felt impossibly heavy in his hands. "My men found it in the wreckage of your old house," Vance continued, his eyes glittering with sadistic pleasure. "They were looking for company records, of course, but found this sentimental little treasure instead. It's quite the read. She writes about you, about her hopes, her dreams, her fears." He flipped a page, pretending to read. "Marcus is drinking again," she writes. "He gets so angry. Last night he hit the wall next to my head. He says the pressure of the mine is too much. I worry what he might do. I worry for Annie." "Liar," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "Am I?" Vance's smile widened. "There's more. An entry from the day before the accident. Silas Vance, the new company man, was kind to me today. He says he can help us. He sees the goodness in Marcus, buried under all that anger. He offered us a way out, a new life in California. far away from this place. It seems your wife was quite taken with me, Holloway. Perhaps she recognized a man of quality when she saw one. The words were poisoned darts, each one finding its mark, each one designed to break him. Vance was painting a picture of him as a drunken, abusive husband, and of Ayanna as a woman looking for an escape. He was trying to poison the one sacred thing Marcus had left, his memory of her. She was seeing him, Marcus thought, his mind reeling. Could it be true? The doubt, insidious and vile, began to creep in. He had been drinking heavily back then. He had been angry, distant. Had he missed it? Had Ayanna been so desperate that she would turn to a man like Vance? It seems your little sanctuary here is built on a foundation of lies, Vance purred, seeing the confusion and pain on Marcus's face. She was going to leave you, Holloway. She was going to take your daughter and leave with me. The explosion just expedited her departure from your life. In a way, I did you a favor. No, Marcus said, shaking his head, trying to clear the fog of poison. No. So you have a choice, Vance said, closing the journal with a soft snap. Give me the Apache girl, and I will give you this journal. You can spend the rest of your days reading your dead wife's words, wondering what might have been. Or you can die here, just like she did, clinging to a memory that was never real. He took another step forward, his hand still resting on the ivory grip of his derringer. What'll it be, Marcus? The truth or a bullet? This was the real attack, not with guns and men, but with words and lies, aimed directly at the cracks in Marcus's soul. And for a terrifying moment, it was working. The doubt was a cancer, eating him alive. Had Ayanna betrayed him? Was his entire grief, his 6 years of penance, based on a lie? He looked at the cabin door, thinking of Luna, the woman who had also built her life around a lie to survive. He thought of the graves on the hill. What was real? His finger tightened on the trigger of the Winchester. He could end it right now. Kill Vance and never know for sure. But the seed of doubt was planted. Vance saw his hesitation. He saw the crack in the armor. He smiled, a true triumphant smile. I thought so, he said, and began to walk forward. But just as Marcus's resolve began to crumble, just as the poison of Vance's words began to take root, a sound cut through the tense silence. The cabin door creaked open. Luna stepped out onto the porch. She wasn't holding the revolver. In her hands, she held a small weathered wooden box. Her face was calm, her eyes clear and focused, not on Vance, but on Marcus. He's lying, Marcus, she said, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. Vance stopped, his smile faltering for the first time. He looked at Luna with annoyance, like a chess player bothered by a fly. The adults are talking, my dear. Go back inside. My mother was a healer, Luna said, ignoring Vance completely, her eyes locked on Marcus. But she was also a midwife. She delivered Ayanna's baby. Marcus stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? Annie was 2 years old when she died. Not Annie, Luna said softly, taking a step toward him. She opened the small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried herbs, was a tiny, intricately beaded baby's moccasin. Ayanna was pregnant again, Marcus, 3 months along. She came to my mother a week before the explosion, overjoyed. She was going to tell you that night, to celebrate. She held out the box. She asked my mother to make this for the new baby, a welcome gift. She said she knew this baby would be the thing to finally heal the anger in you. She said her future was here, with you. The world snapped back into focus. The fog of doubt evaporated, burned away by the simple, powerful truth held in Luna's hands. A baby. They were going to have another child. Ayanna hadn't been leaving him. She had been recommitting to him, to their future. Vance's story was a lie, a cruel, calculated fabrication designed to shatter his spirit. Marcus turned his gaze back to Vance. The rage that filled him now was pure, white-hot, and clean. It was the rage of a man who had been pulled back from the edge of a precipice. Vance's face had changed. The mask of calm superiority was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise, then fury. His plan had failed. He had miscalculated. A touching story, Vance spat, his voice losing its smooth veneer. It changes nothing. His hand moved like a snake, snatching the derringer from his waistband. But Marcus was faster. He didn't aim for the chest. He didn't aim to kill. He fired the Winchester from the hip. The bullet tore through the fleshy part of Vance's thigh. Vance screamed, a high, thin sound of shock and pain, and crumpled to the ground, his derringer flying from his grasp and landing in the snow. He clutched his leg, blood pouring through his fingers, staining his expensive wool trousers, a dark, ugly red. Marcus walked forward, chambering another round with a satisfying shh click. He stood over Vance, the barrel of the Winchester aimed directly between the man's wide, terrified eyes. "You didn't come here for the girl, did you?" Marcus said, the pieces finally falling into place. "You didn't even know for sure the map was real. You came here for me." Vance stared up at him, his face pale with pain and fear. "That wanted poster, it wasn't to find me," Marcus continued, the realization dawning on him. "It was to keep me hiding, to keep me buried out here, blaming myself. You knew my wife was pregnant. You knew everything. You didn't just want the mine. You wanted my life. Why?" Vance gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. "She chose you," he hissed, the words dripping with a venomous, long-festering jealousy. "I offered her everything, money, security, a life away from a drunk like you. But she chose to stay. She said you were a good man who had lost his way. She loved you. A woman like that. She deserved better." So that was it. Not just greed, it was pride. The wounded ego of a rich, powerful man who couldn't stand to be rejected. He hadn't just killed Ayanna in an accident. He had murdered her because he couldn't have her, and he had framed Marcus to destroy the man she had chosen over him. It was more twisted, more personal, more evil than Marcus had ever imagined. He pressed the muzzle of the rifle against Vance's forehead. He could end it, right here. Pull the trigger and send this monster to hell. It would be justice. But as he looked down at the pathetic, bleeding man in the snow, he saw Luna standing on the porch, watching him. He saw the graves on the hill. He saw the face of the man he used to be, and the man he was becoming. Killing Vance would be an ending, but it wouldn't be a victory. It would just be one more ghost to live with. He lowered the rifle. "No," Marcus said, his voice cold and clear. "You're not getting off that easy. You're not going to die out here in the quiet. You're going back to Denver. You're going to stand trial. You're going to tell everyone what you did. You're going to say their names. Ayanna Holloway, Annie Holloway, and the name of the child you murdered before he was ever born." He tore a strip of cloth from Vance's coat and fashioned a crude tourniquet for the man's leg, pulling it brutally tight. Vance cried out in pain. "You're going to live a long, long time," Marcus said, hauling the man to his feet. "And every single day, you're going to remember the face of the man whose life you stole, the man who beat you." He slung Vance over his own horse, tied his hands, and led him back down the trail toward town, toward a justice that was long overdue. Luna watched them go, the small wooden box with the baby moccasin clutched tightly in her hands. The trial of Silas Vance was the talk of the territory. The man's power and money couldn't protect him from the truth, especially when it was delivered by a man with nothing left to lose. Marcus Holloway stood before the court, not as a broken recluse, but as a husband and a father demanding justice. He told his story, and for the first time, the world listened. With Luna by his side, providing the testimony her mother could not, the web of Vance's lies unraveled. The journal was exposed as a forgery, and other miners, emboldened by Marcus's courage, came forward to testify about the unsafe conditions and the deliberate sabotage at the Black Creek mine. Silas Vance was found guilty. His empire crumbled. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison, with nothing but the memory of the man he had failed to destroy. When it was all over, Marcus and Luna stood on the steps of the courthouse, the spring sun warm on their faces. The wanted posters had been torn down. His name was cleared. The ghost had finally been laid to rest. "What now?" Luna asked, shielding her eyes against the sun. Marcus looked at her fierce, beautiful face. He thought of the map on her back, the secret that was still a part of her. The nest of gold was still out there, a treasure that could make them richer than Vance had ever dreamed of being. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. Her skin was warm and real. "What do you say we go find a place so deep in those mountains?" he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That no one can ever find us again?" Luna's answering smile was radiant, a sunrise after a long, dark night. "I think I know a place," she said. They walked away from the town, away from the past, and back toward the wilderness. Not as fugitives, not as victims, but as survivors. They had faced down the monster that had haunted both their lives, and they had won. They built a new life together, in a hidden valley protected by the twin peaks Marcus had recognized from the map on her back. He never asked to see the map again. The real treasure wasn't the gold hidden in the mountain. It was the woman who walked beside him, the strength they had forged in the fire, and the future they would build together. A year later, their son was born. A boy with his father's stubborn chin and his mother's dark, intelligent eyes. They named him Samuel, but Marcus always called him Hope. He was their proof that even after the most brutal of winters, spring could still come, that the deepest wounds could heal, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are not the ones you dig from the earth, but the ones you fight for, the ones you build, and the ones you hold in your arms. The wilderness holds countless stories of revenge and redemption, of broken souls finding their way back to the light. The story of Marcus and Luna is just one of them, a reminder that your past doesn't have to be your prison. If you enjoyed this story and made it all the way to the end, do us a favor and smash that like button. It really helps the channel out. And for more stories about the darkness people hide and the justice they find, make sure you hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a single one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.